I never told this story when the war was still burning, and I never told it after the armistice froze the front lines into silence. Some things are not meant for reports or medals. In the winter of 1951, deep inside the fog-choked valleys near the Eastern Front, I was an infantryman ordered to hold a ridge no map bothered to name. We thought the fog was our enemy, thick, wet, blinding. We were wrong. The fog was only the cover. What watched us from inside it moved with intention, patience, and memory. Men vanished without screams. Radios died mid-sentence. And above us, wings passed through the mist without sound. This account was buried because it did not describe an enemy that could be fought. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. The order said hold the valley, but no one explained why every map showed it as empty, white, and unnamed. I was 19 in the winter of 1951, and already I felt older than the mountains pressing in on us from every direction. My name stopped matching the day I put on the uniform. Out there, you were not a son or a brother. You were a rifle, a pair of boots, and a body to fill a line on frozen ground. Our unit was part of an infantry regiment stretched too thin, pushed east into a mountain sector choked with fog so thick it erased distance and sound. We were under strength, underfed, and exhausted from weeks of retreat and countermarch. When the order came to occupy a valley that required holding, no one asked what was worth holding there. Orders did not invite questions. The march began before dawn. Snow had crusted over the mud, cracking under our boots like thin ice. Each step sent a sharp jolt through my legs, and the strap of my rifle bit into my shoulder where the padding had long worn flat. Breath steamed out of us in quick, nervous clouds. Somewhere behind us, artillery thudded like a distant heartbeat, but the sound felt muffled, as if even the war itself hesitated to follow us into that place. The valley appeared gradually, not as a shape but as an absence. The fog pooled low between the ridgelines, heavy and motionless, like dirty wool laid across the earth. It did not drift the way fog should. It waited. Our lieutenant, a sharp-faced man with new insignia and tired eyes, raised his hand and halted us at the tree line. "Defensive positions," he said. "We dig in before full light." His voice carried authority, but it did not carry far. The fog swallowed it after a few meters. As we began to spread out, I noticed how quiet everything was. No birds, no wind through the branches. Even our equipment seemed subdued, metal clinking softly, as if afraid to announce itself. Radios hissed with weak static, refusing to settle on a clear signal. The operator slapped the side of his set and muttered a curse, but the static only deepened, like breathing too close to a microphone. It was then that the older soldiers began to whisper, not loudly, not openly, just fragments passed mouth to ear while hands kept working with shovels and bayonets. They spoke of patrols that entered this valley and never returned, a fog that rolled in without weather, of shapes seen high above the ridges during other wars, other winters. One man said the locals refused to farm near this place, calling it cursed ground. Another spat into the snow and said curses were for children. Our lieutenant overheard enough to snap at them. "Superstition gets men killed," he said. "The enemy is human. Remember that." Heads bowed, tools kept moving. No one argued, but I saw the way even he kept glancing toward the fog, as if expecting it to answer back. We dug shallow fighting pits along the slope overlooking the valley floor. The ground was frozen hard, each strike of the shovel ringing dull and sharp at the same time. My fingers burned inside my gloves, numbness creeping in and out like a tide. As the light grew, the fog did not lift. Instead, it thickened, rising slightly, curling around the bases of trees, obscuring the lower half of the world. Looking down into it made my stomach tighten. It felt less like looking at terrain and more like looking into deep water. A runner came up from the rear with revised instructions. Hold position. No forward patrols until visibility improved. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It meant we were to sit and wait with our backs to the mountain and our faces toward that blank white silence. Time stretched. Minutes lost their edges. The The cold seeped through wool and skin alike. Somewhere to my left, a soldier coughed. The sound abruptly cut off as if smothered midair. By mid-morning, the fog began to move. Not drifting, not thinning. It pulsed, slowly, like a chest rising and falling. I blinked, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me, but others noticed too. Heads lifted. Men shifted in their pits. The lieutenant barked for stillness, but his voice lacked its earlier sharpness. A shape appeared briefly at the edge of visibility. Just a darker smear within the white. Too large to be a man, too slow to be smoke. Someone raised a rifle. "Hold," the lieutenant ordered, though no shot had been fired. The shape faded, leaving behind a sense of pressure, like a change in altitude. The radio crackled suddenly, loud enough to make several of us flinch. A burst of static, then a half-formed word, then nothing. The operator stared at the set as if it had betrayed him. "It was working yesterday," he said, to no one in particular. That was when fear began to change shape. Until then, fear had been familiar. Shellfire, air raids, night assaults, things with sound and direction. This was different. This fear had no clear edge. Crept, settled, and waited. I realized my breathing had slowed without my noticing. Each inhale careful, each exhale restrained, as if too much noise might draw attention. An older corporal crawled past my position, pretending to check our fields of fire. As he passed, he murmured, "Do not look into the fog for too long." I wanted to ask why, but he was already gone, melting back into the line like a shadow at noon. By afternoon, the valley floor was completely gone from sight. The fog climbed higher, brushing the slope where we lay. It touched my boots, cold and damp, soaking through the leather. I felt a strange urge to pull my feet back, as if something below might grab them. I clenched my jaw and stayed still. Soldiers do not move unless ordered. Soldiers do not panic. That is what we were taught. As dusk approached, flares were prepared but not fired. No one wanted to light up that fog unless absolutely necessary. We listened instead, not for enemy movement but for anything at all. The silence pressed in harder than the cold. I remember thinking that if the war had ended at that moment, if every gun had fallen silent, the valley would have sounded exactly the same. Night orders came down the line in whispers. 2-man watch rotations. No unnecessary movement. No firing unless directly attacked. I settled deeper into my pit, pulling my coat tighter, rifle across my knees. Above us, the fog glowed faintly with reflected starlight, like a ceiling just out of reach. We believed fear came from artillery and air raids, from men shouting in languages you did not understand. That night, as the fog crept higher and the radios fell completely silent, I understood that fear could also come quietly, patiently, from something that did not need to announce itself at all. The first thing the valley took from us was sound, and without sound, even armed men begin to doubt their own existence. We moved at first light, ordered to advance downslope and establish a tighter perimeter along the valley floor. The fog still hung low, but daylight revealed enough shape to convince command that the ground could be held. That was the language they used, held, as if land were a thing that could be gripped by cold fingers and kept from slipping away. I climbed out of my pit with stiff legs, joints aching from the night cold, and followed the file downward. Snow thinned as we descended, replaced by frozen mud that cracked softly under our boots. That softness unsettled me more than noise would have. In every other place I had fought, movement announced itself. Here, the earth absorbed us. Within minutes, I noticed something wrong. My boots struck the ground, but the sound did not return to me. No echo, no satisfying crunch. It was as if the noise fell straight down and stayed there. I glanced to my right, watching another soldier step forward. I saw his heel sink, saw the mud break, but I barely heard it. When I whispered his name, my own voice felt thin, weak, like breath against glass. He turned, confused, asking me what I had said, and even his reply arrived dulled, robbed of distance. The valley narrowed as we advanced. Trees crowded closer, their trunks dark with moisture. The fog clung to their lower halves, making it seem as though they floated. Radios began to misbehave almost immediately. Short bursts of static interrupted every transmission. Commands had to be repeated, then repeated again. Eventually, the lieutenant resorted to hand signals, his gestures sharp and exaggerated. Like a man directing traffic in a storm no one else could see. I kept scanning upward, checking the ridgelines and the space above the fog. That was where I first noticed movement. At a glance, it looked like cloud shadow or a trick of light, but it moved against the wind, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was mist rising unevenly. I told myself many things in those minutes. The mind will accept almost any lie if the alternative has no name. As we reached the valley floor, the silence deepened. Even the distant war, the artillery, the engines, the occasional scream of aircraft might as well have been happening on another planet. The world shrank to what I could see, and what I could see was colorless and close. Orders came down the line to halt and listen. We did. We heard nothing. No enemy movement. No wildlife. No wind. The absence of sound pressed against my ears until they rang. The radio operator tried again, adjusting dials with trembling fingers. A sharp crackle flared, followed by a long, wavering hiss, like something exhaling slowly. Then the set went dead. Not silent. Dead. No static. No response. He stared at it, shaking it gently as if afraid to anger it. "It's like the valley swallowed the signal," he said. No one laughed. We spread out, forming a loose defensive arc. I knelt behind a fallen log slick with moisture, rifle barrel resting on bark. My breath fogged my vision. When I wiped it away, I saw movement again above us. This time I was sure. A silhouette passed across a lighter patch of mist, vast and angular. Too broad for a bird, too structured to be weather. It did not flap. It glided. The motion carried purpose, not drift. I tried to point it out, raising my hand, but the man beside me shook his head, eyes fixed forward. Either he could not see it or he refused to. A flare was requested, then denied. Visibility, command said, was acceptable. The word felt obscene. As the hours dragged on, the valley seemed to compress. Distances shortened. Men who had been 10 meters away now felt much closer, though I knew they had not moved. Depth perception failed. I reached out once, convinced a tree trunk was within arm's length, and my fingers brushed nothing but damp air. Laughter rippled weakly through the line, then died when no echo followed it. We advanced again. Slower now, every step deliberate. I became acutely aware of my own body. Heartbeat, breath, the faint scrape of fabric when I shifted my weight. These sounds existed only inside me. Outside, the valley remained indifferent. That indifference frightened me more than hostility would have. An enemy that ignores you is harder to fight than one that hates you. At midday, we halted near a shallow depression where the fog pooled thicker than anywhere else. The lieutenant consulted his map, turning it sideways, then upside down, as if orientation might help. "This should be a stream bed," he muttered. There was no water, not even ice, just fog, dense and unmoving, filling the depression like poured milk. Another shape crossed overhead, then another. This time several of us saw it. Heads tilted back, mouths opened. No one spoke. The shapes moved in wide arcs, circling the valley, never descending, never leaving. Their size became clearer against the faint light, wingspans wider than any aircraft I had seen at that altitude, yet utterly silent. No engine, no wind disturbance, just presence. Fear settled fully then, heavy and undeniable. Fingers tightened on triggers. Safety catches clicked off. Still no order came. The lieutenant's face had gone pale, his authority leaking away with every unanswered question. As evening approached, the fog thickened again, rising from the ground like a tide returning. The valley floor disappeared entirely. Sentries were posted closer together. Distances shortened by command, not choice. When the sun dipped below the ridgeline, darkness arrived abruptly. Swallowed whole by white, we dug in where we stood. Shallow scrapes more psychological than practical. Flares were placed within reach. Watches were assigned. I took first rotation, eyes straining into nothingness. Sound did not return with night. If anything, it vanished more completely somewhere between two sentry posts, spaced no more than a few steps apart. The fog grew thicker still, and as night settled fully over the valley, it crept in like a closing hand, and that was where the first man vanished without a sound. Some warnings are not meant to frighten you, only to prepare you for the moment disbelief becomes impossible. The man was brought in just before midnight, pulled from the edge of the valley where the fog thinned briefly, as if allowing him to exist only long enough to be taken. He was old, older than anyone I had seen near the front. His back bent by years rather than hunger alone. 2 soldiers held his arms, but he did not struggle. His eyes kept drifting upward, following something none of us could see, and that alone unsettled me more than resistance would have. A lantern was set between us, its flame weak and yellow, fighting the fog that pressed close as if curious. The lieutenant questioned him sharply, demanding to know if enemy units were hiding nearby, if he had guided infiltrators through the valley. The old man listened patiently, nodding once, twice, then shook his head. His voice, when he finally spoke, was thin but steady. He said there were no soldiers down there, not anymore. Not since the Watcher returned. The word drew murmurs from the line. The lieutenant snapped for silence, but even he leaned forward. The old man told us he had lived near this valley as a child, before the war, before the last war, before borders hardened and softened again. He said the valley did not belong to armies. It belonged to something that arrived when blood soaked the ground and smoke filled the sky. A bad omen spirit, he called it. A watcher with wings that marked the coming of disaster. As he spoke, the fog seemed to thicken around the lantern, bending the light. He described the creature without drama, as if listing weather signs. It came before fires, before plagues, before battles that erased villages. It did not choose sides. It observed, counted. When it appeared, elders told children to stay indoors and soldiers to turn back, because those who challenged it were not mourned properly. They simply did not return. I felt something tighten in my chest as he spoke, because his words brushed against memories I had buried. Stories whispered by my grandmother during power outages, about a winged thing that crossed the sky when the world was about to change for the worse. I had laughed then, a boy too eager for certainty. Listening now, rifle across my knees, those old stories resurfaced with sharp clarity. The details matched too closely to dismiss. The lieutenant scoffed, calling it folklore meant to scare children. He demanded facts. The old man met his gaze calmly and said facts were for reports, not survival. He said the valley swallowed sound because the Watcher disliked noise. He said radios failed because signals attracted its attention. He said the fog was not weather but cover, rising when it hunted, lifting when it wished to be seen. That last sentence drew uneasy glances. Someone muttered that the old man was trying to frighten us. Someone else asked how many times it had appeared before. The old man answered without hesitation. Every war, every disaster worth remembering. He named years and places in a rhythm that sounded rehearsed, passed down rather than learned. I could not verify any of it, but the conviction in his voice carried weight. The lieutenant ordered him removed, clearly finished with the interrogation. As the soldiers pulled the old man away, he twisted slightly, his eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, the fog thinned just enough for me to see the whites of his eyes gleam. "Do not fire at it," he said quietly. "It notices defiance." Then he was gone, swallowed again by white. We were told to forget what we had heard. The lieutenant reminded us that superstition weakened discipline. Still, the words lingered. Men avoided looking upward. Conversations dropped to whispers. The lantern was extinguished, plunging us back into a darkness softened only by fog glow. I took my turn on watch, senses stretched thin, replaying the old man's warning again and again. Hours passed strangely. Time lost structure. My watch ended without my noticing when it had begun. The fog ebbed and flowed, brushing against my boots, then retreating. Once, I heard a faint rush of air overhead, slow and heavy, like fabric pulled through water. I did not look up. I remembered the warning too well. Somewhere to our left, a sentry shifted position. I heard the scrape of his gear only because it happened so close. He whispered my name. I answered. My voice sounded wrong to my own ears, flattened, drained. He asked if I believed the villager. I hesitated. Belief felt like a luxury, but disbelief felt dangerous. I told him I believed in patterns. He did not press further. As the night deepened, the fog began to change. It no longer pressed upward. Instead, it slowly receded, thinning in places, revealing fragments of the valley floor. Shapes emerged, rocks, tree roots, the outline of the depression we had crossed earlier. With visibility came unease. The old man had said the fog lifted when the watcher wished to be seen. A pale band of light crept along the horizon, signaling the approach of dawn. The temperature dropped sharply, biting through layers. Men stirred, checking weapons, rubbing hands together. No orders came. The lieutenant stood rigid, staring into the thinning mist. Then I saw it. Not fully, not clearly. A massive silhouette suspended above the valley, wings spread wide, cutting across the paling sky. It did not descend. It did not flee. It remained, vast and patient, as if waiting for us to acknowledge it properly. My breath caught, frost stinging my lungs, before dawn fully broke. The fog lifted just enough for us to understand what had been watching us from above. When the fog finally looked back at us, I understood that being seen was worse than being attacked. Stand came without a bugle or shouted command. It happened the way fear often does, quietly all at once. Men rose from their scrapes and pits as if pulled by the same invisible string, rifles coming up, fingers brushing triggers. Dawn should have brought clarity, but the light only thinned the fog enough to give shape to dread. The valley remained muted, drained of color, as though the world had been sketched and never finished. I stood with my knees locked, breath shallow, staring into the pale mass below the slope, waiting for something human to emerge and give this tension a familiar shape. Instead, the mist shifted upward, not rising like heat or drifting like weather, but unfolding. The fog parted in slow layers, revealing darkness behind it, depth where there should have been sky. I heard a sharp intake of breath from somewhere along the line. Then another. Then silence again, heavy and expectant. From that opening, wings emerged. Not suddenly, not violently. They unfolded with deliberate patience, each movement controlled, measured, as if the thing they belonged to was certain of our attention. The span was immense, stretching wider than the treeline, the edges dissolving into fog before my eyes could trace them fully. The air changed as they moved, pressure shifting against my face, my ears popping slightly as if altitude itself had been disturbed. Then the eyes appeared. 2 points of deep red, reflective rather than glowing, like wet embers catching firelight. They fixed on us with unnerving precision, not scanning, not searching, choosing. I felt the sensation immediately, a tightening behind my sternum, as though my chest had been gently but firmly gripped. I knew, with a certainty that bypassed thought, that it could see every one of US.No order came. The lieutenant stood frozen, mouth slightly open, the authority drained from his posture. For a heartbeat, maybe two, nothing happened. In that suspended moment, I understood the old man's warning. This was not an ambush. This was inspection. Someone screamed. The sound cracked the spell, thin and hysterical. A rifle went off, the muzzle flashed brief and violent against the pale fog. The shot vanished immediately, swallowed without echo. Then another shot, then many. Panic spread faster than command ever could. Men fired upward, downward, blindly into the mist. Tracers streaked briefly before dissolving. There was no impact sound, no return fire. The bullets simply ceased to exist. I fired once myself, reflex overpowering reason. The recoil grounded me for a fraction of a second, but the result was the same, nothing. No reaction. The eyes did not blink. The wings did not falter. If anything, the stillness deepened, as if the creature were recording our response. Shouting erupted along the line. Someone cried that it was an aircraft. Someone else shouted that it was a demon. The radio operator screamed that the set was dead, smashing it against the ground in frustration. The fog thickened again, curling around us, brushing shoulders and helmets, threading itself between bodies like fingers testing gaps. The lieutenant finally found his voice, hoarse and strained. He shouted for ceasefire, for discipline, for withdrawal to secondary positions upslope. The words barely traveled, but repetition carried them down the line. Men hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the terror of turning their backs. I risked another glance upward. The eyes had shifted slightly, tracking movement along our line. Not chasing, not advancing, watching men decide, watching who broke first. That realization hollowed me out. Whatever this was, it did not need to attack. Fear did the work for it. The first man ran. He scrambled up slope, slipping on mud, gear clattering loudly in the oppressive quiet. He made it maybe 10 steps before the fog surged upward, thicker, faster than before. It wrapped around him completely. His shout cut off mid-syllable. No scream followed. No impact. He was simply gone. That broke us. Order disintegrated into raw survival instinct. Men surged backward, colliding, tripping, dragging each other up the slope. I moved with them, heart hammering so hard it hurt, lungs burning with cold air. The fog pursued us, rising, curling, shaping itself around retreating bodies. Above us, the wings shifted, not flapping, adjusting. The eyes remained fixed on the valley, not on individuals, as if marking the terrain rather than the men fleeing across it. That distinction terrified me more than pursuit would have. I stumbled, catching myself on a tree root slick with moisture. As I pushed up, I saw something move through the fog beside me, tall and vertical, not human in proportion. I did not look directly at it. I remembered the warning too late to fully obey, but enough to turn my head away. Cold brushed my cheek, like passing air, and then it was gone. The slope steepened. Those who reached the treeline did not stop running. Those who fell behind vanished one by one, the fog claiming them without sound or struggle. I did not hear bones break. I did not hear screams. The valley consumed quietly. To the ridge, the lieutenant tried to re-establish control, waving men onward, shouting hoarse orders that barely existed outside his own head. I reached him, hands shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of my rifle. He looked past me, eyes wide, face drained of blood. "It won't let us leave," he said, not as a command but as an observation. Below us, the fog churned, rising higher than it had before, sealing the valley completely. The eyes faded, the wings dissolving back into mist, as if satisfied with what they had learned. The order to retreat had been given, but the valley did not release those who tried to leave it. Night did not fall on the ridge. It descended, heavy and deliberate, as if summoned by something that had been waiting for darkness to finish its work. We pulled what remained of our unit onto the ridgeline just before full night sealed the valley behind us. There was no clean line, no proper perimeter. Men arrived in clusters or alone, breathless, faces streaked with mud and fog moisture, eyes too wide to be sane. Rifles were clutched like talismans rather than tools. Someone tried to count us and stopped halfway through, hands shaking too badly to continue. The fog below surged and withdrew in slow waves, brushing the slope but not yet overtaking it. As if the ridge itself marked a boundary that required patience to cross, the lieutenant attempted to restore order. He barked commands until his voice cracked, assigning sectors, demanding silence, insisting we dig in. A few obeyed out of habit, scraping shallow trenches into frozen soil with numb hands. Most simply crouched where they stood, backs to rock, eyes fixed on the darkness below. Discipline, drilled into us for months, hung by a thread stretched too thin to hold. Full darkness arrived without transition. There was no gradual dimming, no comforting adjustment. One moment we could see the fog's edge, the next it merged seamlessly with the night sky, erasing depth entirely. Stars vanished. The ridge felt suspended in nothing. I pressed my palm against the rock behind me, grounding myself in cold solidity, reminding myself that something still existed beneath my skin. The first sound was not a scream. It was a rush of air, deep and slow, passing overhead. Not wind. Wind scatters, whistles, changes. This was focused, directional, carried weight. Every man on the ridge felt it at once. Helmets tilted upward. Breath held. The air displaced above us shifted again. Closer this time, the pressure making my ears ache faintly. Someone whispered a prayer. Another man sobbed quietly. The sound swallowed almost immediately. The fog below thickened, climbing higher, spilling over the ridge in long tendrils. It did not rush. It explored. As it reached us, it clung to boots and legs, cold soaking through fabric. Numbing skin. A sentry to my left stiffened suddenly. I turned just in time to see him rise off the ground. Not dragged, lifted. His feet left the earth slowly, as if gravity had loosened its grip. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The fog enveloped him from the waist up, then the shoulders, then the head. In seconds, there was nothing where he had been. No struggle marks, no echo, just absence. Panic surged, raw and uncontrollable. A few men fired blindly upward. Muzzle flashes flared briefly, illuminating fragments of fog and terrified faces. The shots vanished into the dark without response. The air overhead shifted again, closer now, the movement strong enough to tug at loose fabric. I saw the marks then. Gouges carved into the frozen rock near the ridge edge, deep and uneven, as if something with immense strength had gripped the stone and pulled itself along. They were fresh, edges sharp, dusted with frost. Claw marks. The realization hit me with physical force, hollowing my stomach. This thing did not only fly, it touched the earth when it wished to. Another man was taken, then another, always silently, always upward. The fog surged in rhythm with the air shifts, rising higher with each disappearance. The creature moved among us without urgency, without resistance. It did not chase. It selected. That methodical calm broke something essential inside us. Orders dissolved completely. The lieutenant shouted until his voice was gone, waving his pistol uselessly. No formation held. No plan survived first contact with this reality. Men scattered along the ridge, some crawling, some running, some freezing in place. Unable to decide which choice was least fatal, I stayed low, pressing myself against the rock, minimizing movement. Each time the air shifted overhead, I felt it ripple through my chest, vibrating my bones. Once, the fog parted just enough for me to glimpse a section of wing above us. Vast, textured, the surface catching faint light like stretched leather. It moved past without touching me, close enough that the temperature dropped sharply in its wake. A soldier near the center of the ridge tried to climb higher, scrambling up a steeper outcrop. His fingers slipped on ice. As he fell back, something caught him mid-drop. Not hands, not claws that I could see. He simply stopped falling and rose instead, suspended for a heartbeat before vanishing upward. His rifle clattered back down alone, striking rock with a sound that felt obscenely loud in the silence. Time lost coherence. Minutes felt like hours, hours like brief flashes between movements overhead. My muscles trembled from cold and terror. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale, afraid that too much noise would draw attention. The old villager's warning echoed relentlessly in my head. Do not defy it. Do not call to it. Some point, firing stopped entirely. Ammunition ran out or was abandoned. Survival narrowed to stillness and chance. Those who moved too much were noticed. Those who cried out were removed. Those who remained quiet sometimes lasted longer. That became our only rule. Near what I guessed was midnight, the fog reached its highest point, cresting fully over the ridge. Visibility dropped to nothing. I felt rather than saw the creature pass again, the air pressing down hard enough to force me flat against the rock. My breath left me in a rush. For a terrifying second, I thought it had chosen me. Then the pressure lifted, drifting onward. When the fog finally began to recede, it did so gradually, reluctantly, as if withdrawing from a task unfinished only because patience demanded delay. The air overhead grew still. No more shifts. No more rushes. The night remained, but the sense of being actively hunted faded into something colder and more distant. I did not move until gray light began to creep back into the world. My body ached from immobility, joints stiff, fingers barely responsive. Around me lay scattered equipment, abandoned weapons, torn packs. No bodies, no blood, just what men had dropped when lifted out of the world that as morning approached. The fog thinned at last, revealing a ridge stripped nearly bare of life. By the time the sun fully rose, only a handful of us remained standing, and the valley below lay quiet once more, as if nothing had happened at all. When the fog finally released us, it left behind a silence heavier than anything it had taken. Morning found us scattered along the upper slopes beyond the ridge, stumbling out of the thinning white like survivors of a shipwreck crawling onto an unfamiliar shore. The light felt wrong, too clean for what had happened. Frost glittered on rocks. Birds finally dared to return to the air, and yet none of it restored balance. We gathered instinctively, counting without speaking, faces tightening with each number spoken aloud. Barely half our unit remained. Some names were repeated twice, then struck away. Others were never called at all. There were no bodies to recover, no wounded to treat. Men had simply ceased to be. Command elements arrived by midday, moving cautiously, eyes scanning the valley we refused to look at. Officers asked questions in clipped, efficient tones, writing notes with gloved hands. Where were the missing soldiers last seen? What enemy contact had we made? What direction had the attack come from? Each question assumed something familiar. None of our answers fit. The lieutenant tried to explain. He spoke of fog behavior, of silence, of men lifted upward without sound. He stopped when he saw the looks on their faces. A medic gently pressed him to sit down, murmuring about shock and exhaustion. Someone took his pistol away. The rest of us learned quickly. We described confusion. We described disorganization. We described poor visibility and enemy infiltration. Those were words that fit inside reports.by evening. The official version had settled into place. Enemy reconnaissance units exploiting terrain and weather. Losses attributed to exposure, panic, and miscommunication. Radios failing due to atmospheric conditions. The valley classified as tactically unstable but otherwise unremarkable. It was a clean story. It explained enough without inviting further questions. No one wrote about wings. No one mentioned eyes. No one explained how a man could vanish between two sentry posts spaced less than 10 steps apart. Those details existed only in our memories, and even there they felt dangerous, like handling live ammunition without orders. We were reassigned within 48 hours, redistributed among other units as replacements. The lieutenant was removed quietly, sent rearward for evaluation. I never saw him again. The rest of us were warned, gently but firmly, that spreading unverified accounts harmed morale. The word unverified did heavy work. It suggested imagination, exaggeration, fear. It implied weakness. I tried to accept the official story. I repeated it when asked. Each time it tasted thinner. At night, when I closed my eyes, I did not see enemy soldiers. I saw fog lifting straight upward. I heard the pressure shift in the air. I remembered the weightless moment before a man was taken. Those memories did not fade with distance from the valley. They sharpened. Others carried it too. I saw it in the way men avoided low ground at dawn, in how sentries doubled their watches whenever fog rolled in. Radios crackled and every head turned skyward. A sudden hush would fall over a group mid-conversation, each man realizing at once what he had almost said. The war continued, loud and brutal in all the familiar ways. Artillery flattened hills. Aircraft screamed overhead. Men died screaming, bleeding, fighting back. Compared to that, what happened in the valley should have seemed unreal. Instead, it felt more solid than anything else I experienced. Shellfire obeyed physics. Bullets followed trajectories. The fog had followed intent. I learned to recognize the signs of shared memory. Pause too long before answering a question. A glance upward when the air went still. a refusal to volunteer for certain patrol routes without explanation. We did not need to speak openly. The knowledge passed quietly, efficiently, like a field expedient drill no one wrote down. Within weeks, the valley acquired a reputation. Not officially. Maps remained unchanged. Orders continued to refer to grid coordinates. But among the troops, names emerged in whispers. Not the same name, not even the same language, but always the same meaning. The place where sound dies. The valley that counts men. The fog ground. New units rotated through the sector were warned obliquely. Stay high. Move fast. Do not linger when visibility drops. Do not fire into fog unless fired upon. Some listened. Some laughed. Experience determined which group survived longer. I overheard an officer once complaining that morale issues were spreading faster than enemy propaganda. He blamed superstition, illiteracy, fatigue. He never blamed the valley. He never stood inside it long enough to understand. At night, lying in a new position far from that place, I would sometimes feel the air change slightly, pressure shifting for no reason. My body would tense before my mind could intervene. Each time, nothing followed. Still, sleep came harder after that. The missing men were eventually listed as killed in action. Families received folded flags and vague explanations. No graves were marked. No memorial named the place where they disappeared. History closed its ledger neatly, satisfied. But among those of us who walked out of the fog, history remained unfinished. We carried something back with us that could not be logged or buried. A certainty that war does not merely kill. Sometimes it attracts attention. Rumors, unlike reports, did not need permission to move. They passed from unit to unit, reshaped by language and fear, but always circling the same truth. Soon, the valley earned a name. Soldiers refused to speak aloud, and everyone knew exactly which place that silence referred to. Stories do not survive wars because they are frightening. They survive because they keep people alive. After the valley, none of us spoke openly about what we had seen. Silence became part of our discipline, as natural as cleaning a rifle or checking a perimeter. Yet silence did not mean forgetting. The memory settled into us, reshaping how we moved, how we watched the sky, how we measured distance in fog. When new replacements arrived, young faces still carrying ideas of glory or certainty, we did not scare them with details. Fear fades. Instruction endures. The warnings came quietly. A hand on the shoulder before a night patrol. A low voice explaining which ravines to avoid at dawn. A casual remark that some terrain was not worth holding. No one mentioned wings. No one described eyes. We framed it as experience, the kind earned at cost. Young soldiers listen when you speak like that. They may doubt superstition, but they respect survival. Patrol routes shifted without formal orders. Maps stayed the same, but pencils marked different paths. When fog gathered low and thick, squads took the long way around, even if it meant extra hours of cold and exposure. Officers noticed delays but accepted them. Too many losses elsewhere demanded attention. Terrain that swallowed men without trace was quietly deprioritized. The valley became a fixed absence in our planning. We oriented around it, never through it. Sentries posted near it doubled watches automatically. Radios were checked twice as often. Flares were kept close but used sparingly. These habits spread faster than doctrine. A soldier transferred from another unit would adopt them within days, sensing the unspoken rule at work. What struck me most was how the story changed shape as it traveled. It shed excess. Embellishment fell away. What remained was practical. Do not fire upward without cause. Do not linger when the air goes still. If fog rises straight instead of drifting, leave. These were not legends. They were procedures passed mouth to ear. I once corrected a young corporal who joked about ghosts. I told him ghosts haunt memory, not terrain. He nodded, embarrassed, and never joked again. The warning had landed. Over time, the valley's name stopped being mentioned entirely. It was referred to indirectly with gestures or pauses. That silence carried authority. When someone asked why a patrol route curved so widely, the answer was simply, because it does. That was enough. The war dragged on. Seasons changed. Units rotated. I survived long enough to become one of the older men, the kind others watched before making decisions. I found myself repeating the same quiet cautions I had once received. My voice measured, my words chosen carefully. I did not feel like a storyteller. I felt like a custodian. Years later, after the guns fell silent and borders hardened again, I was far from that valley, working a civilian job in a place that felt unreal in its normality. One evening, in a crowded room filled with unfamiliar accents, I overheard a conversation that made my hands go cold. They spoke of a winged figure seen before disasters, a fog that behaved incorrectly, of silence where sound should have lived. They used different names, different places, different years, but the shape of the story matched too closely to dismiss. I did not join their conversation. I did not need to. The warning had already found its way to them, just as it had to us. Some truths do not belong to one war or one country. They move along the fractures history creates. That night, I understood that what we had carried out of the valley was not a secret meant to be hidden forever. It was a lesson meant to travel carefully, changing hands only when needed. The story had never been about fear. It had been about recognition. And somewhere, far from the ridgeline and the fog, others were beginning to recognize it too. I believed the war had ended, until I realized it had only changed uniforms. Decades passed before I heard the story again, and by then I was no longer a soldier, just an aging man carrying memories that refused to retire. The world had rebuilt itself around me. Cities rose where ruins once smoldered. Borders hardened into lines people argued over rather than bled for. I told myself the valley belonged to another life, sealed away with ration cards and field manuals. I told myself that what we saw had been fear shaped by exhaustion. That belief held, fragile but functional, until I began to notice the pattern. It started quietly. A newspaper article describing strange sightings before an industrial disaster. A radio program where callers spoke of a winged shape seen in the sky days before an earthquake. Later, foreign magazines arrived at the factory where I worked, discarded by engineers who skimmed them during breaks. In one, an illustration caught my eye. A towering silhouette with outstretched wings hovering above a bridge at night. My chest tightened the way it had on the ridge. I closed the magazine and walked outside, needing air. The names were different. The explanations varied. Some called it a harbinger, others a guardian. Some dismissed it entirely, but the details aligned too precisely to ignore. The silence that accompanied it. The way sound seemed to flatten. The feeling of being observed rather than hunted. These were not coincidences. They were echoes. I began to listen more carefully. Not for confirmation, but for restraint. Those who had truly seen it spoke cautiously, often reluctantly. They emphasized timing over appearance. They spoke of wars, collapses, disasters, moments when human systems failed under their own weight. The winged figure did not cause these events. Preceded them. It witnessed them. That realization changed how I understood the valley. We had believed we were defending terrain, holding a position against an enemy force. In truth, we had wandered into a place where history paused to observe itself. War, I came to understand, is not just a human activity. It is a signal. Smoke, noise, blood, fear. All of it announces itself far beyond our maps and strategies. Some things notice. The valley became folklore in the years that followed. I learned that from letters and quiet conversations, from veterans who tracked down others who had served near that sector. Stories softened with time, edges rounded, details blurred. The fog became symbolic, the wings metaphorical. That was inevitable. Memory cannot remain sharp forever without cutting its bearer. For me, it never dulled completely. I could still feel the pressure shift in the air when I thought of it. I could still see the way the eyes reflected light rather than emitted it, as if drawing meaning from what they observed. I could still remember the absence of sound, how it made existence itself feel uncertain. I never spoke publicly about it. Silence, once learned, is difficult to unlearn. And I understood something else as well. Speaking openly would change the story's purpose. It would turn warning into spectacle, lesson into entertainment. The story had survived because it remained functional, told people where not to stand, when to leave, how to recognize moments when history bends toward disaster. As I grew older, younger generations asked fewer questions about the war. They preferred cleaner narratives. Heroes, villains, clear endings. I did not correct them. Every generation deserves its illusions until reality demands otherwise. What stayed with me most was not fear, but humility. On the ridge, stripped of doctrine and command, I learned that human conflict does not exist in isolation. We are not the only witnesses to our violence. War pulls attention the way a wound draws flies. It reveals patterns older than nations, older than ideology. The Winged Watcher, whatever its nature, did not care who won. It did not intervene. It did not judge. It observed. That may be the most unsettling truth of all. We like to believe suffering invites justice or punishment. Sometimes it only invites attention. That I visited the region once more, years later, standing far from the original valley, now marked on maps as unremarkable terrain. There was no fog that day, just wind and grass and distant road noise. Life continued, indifferent. I did not approach closer. Some boundaries remain even when they are no longer enforced. In the end, the story followed the same path as all wartime truths. It slipped out of reports and into memory, then into folklore, then into silence. But silence does not erase meaning. It preserves it. I survived the valley, but I did not escape it. It became a lens through which I understood conflict, disaster, and the limits of human control. When wars erupted elsewhere in the world, I listened for the signs. When disaster struck without warning, I wondered who had been watching beforehand. Some legends are not born from imagination, but from soldiers who survived long enough to stay silent. The story is inspired by real wartime reports, blended with folklore and dramatized for narrative purposes.